You experienced what has been deemed as the fastest ejection in naval aviation history. And by the grace of God, you survived the fall.
My flight lead and I set up out in the airspace over the Atlantic. As we merged the aircraft, we were a higher airspeed than typical. With a slight distraction from a new piece of equipment that I had, I didn't quite realize the airspeed that I had reached, and I opted to maneuver the aircraft nose low, so in a dive towards the ocean. The aircraft system detected bombs on the wings that weren't actually there, and so it limited the amount of G-force that I could apply to the jet. And all of a sudden that just lifted up. I ejected so fast that the dry suit that I was wearing shred open. By the time I exited the aircraft, I was 1.5 seconds from impacting the water. My parachute immediately deployed, and it slowed me enough that I didn't die on impact. For the next 1.5 hours, I was in the ocean. It was this overwhelming sense of dread of being drowned alive, and my body just kicked into a full-up survival mode. I then spent the next week in an induced coma, undergoing over 12 trauma surgeries, limb salvage procedures with fasciotomies to save my limbs from amputation. They said, "You've been in a severe accident, you were in a high-speed ejection from a jet, your body has been destroyed, you're never gonna walk again, you're never gonna use your arms again, and your flying career is over." And the first thing that came across my mind was how I was gonna prove them all wrong.
This is Sparta!
Welcome back to Spartan Leadership. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick. Hey, and if this is your first time on the show, listening in, welcome. We are happy to have you. We're bringing you high impact leaders, sharing their stories, sharing their lessons, and helping impact your life. And longtime listeners, you know what to do. Share these episodes far and wide. Today, we have the privilege of hearing a remarkable story of resilience, a story we as a nation cannot afford to ignore. It's the journey of a veteran on his path to recovery. Former Navy FA-18 pilot, an avid ultra athlete, devoted healer of veterans, and above all, a dedicated husband and father of two. Please join me in welcoming Kegan Gill to the show. Welcome, brother.
Thank you for having me on. It's an honor to be here.
Well, excited. Another Midwest guy. We're bearing through the snow in April. And hopefully, I don't know about your part of the woods, but it looks like Sunday we're supposed to get to 60 degrees and finally see some spring weather.
Finally, get some sunshine.
Yeah. I just had a massive tree come down, so I through some sunshine, we'll be out with a chainsaw getting that all organized. One of my favorite trees on the property, so always work to be done.
Yeah, that's funny. We just had a huge branch come down on our roof last night that woke everybody up, so I'm going to be out there with the chainsaw this afternoon as well.
Oh man, sorry to hear that. Yeah, that is, luckily the tree fell the right way and didn't take down the fence or any alpaca. But man, sorry to hear that. That's a pain in the butt.
Yeah, you know how it goes.
Yeah, always something, right? So, all right, let's get into this because this is going to be a high impact conversation. So Kegan, you experienced what has been deemed as the fastest ejection in naval aviation history. And by the grace of God, you survived the fall. Could you take us back to what seemingly, I don't know if you want to call this an ordinary moment, but these high cost, high technology planes, it's supposed to be an ordinary and maybe an ordinary morning, and walk us through the events that unfolded after that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, it really started like what seemed like a normal morning for me. Walked into the squadron, my squadron mate, Fisty, sitting at the squadron duty desk, manning the radios and the phone for the day, which all the pilots rotate through. And as a joke, he had put up on the whiteboard behind him all these positions of GPS tagged white sharks that were underneath the airspace that we were going to utilize that day out over the Atlantic Ocean. We get kind of a morbid sense of humor in that world to kind of break the stress out. And Fisty was a master of keeping things light. And anyways, we were joking that there's all these sharks underneath the area, and the water temperature that day was at 37 degrees Fahrenheit out in the Atlantic Ocean, below freezing air temperatures.
Good cold plunge temperature.
And it just so happened one of these great white sharks was right underneath my airspace. Her name's Mary Lee. She's a 16-foot, 3,500-pound white shark. And so Fissy was joking, hey man, it'd be a terrible day to eject between the cold water and the shark and everything. Um, anyways, briefed, got ready for the flight, put on my dry suit, which we wear when we're flying over the frigid ocean like that in case we have to go in it, which we never think would actually happen. But again, as I was leaving, another squadron mate, Basil, kind of jinxed me for the day. He said, you've been in the squadron for almost a year and you haven't done anything dumb enough yet to earn a call sign. Most of the other guys that had joined the same time as me, they had a whole list of call signs, had already gotten their call signs. So it was unusual, but I had just played the small mouth, big ears card and played it under the radar. So nobody really had any ammo to use against me to give me something embarrassing or funny enough. So I walked on the flight, took off, went and did some air-to-air refueling. All of that went completely normal. And with some extra fuel and time, my flight lead and I set up out in the airspace over the Atlantic to do BFM, or basic fighter maneuvering, which is probably the epitome of what people think when they think fighter pilots. So it's a couple or two or more aircraft trying to shoot each other down within visual range using guns and missiles. And in this time, simulated, but we simulate very close to the real thing. Basically, everything's as real as possible other than we're not actually shooting real ordnance at each other. So we set up, we did several sets of these fights, which sort of conclude like a round of martial arts would. When there's a clear winner or loser, you knock it off and you reset. So you get several repetitions of this. We hit Joker fuel, meaning we were just about out of fuel for the day. Everything had gone smoothly. As expected, I had been getting my ass kicked by the senior pilot. He had over 15 years of fighting the jet at this point. He was a Top Gun graduate. But like a lot of things, that's just how you learn. You get in the ring with the big dog and you figure it out. We set up for this last fight. After we hit Joker fuel, meaning we had just enough fuel to knock out one quick set of fighting before we had to return to base. Called the fights on, and the two jets pitched in at each other. When we started the fight, we were up at about 12,500 feet above the ocean. So that's over 2 nautical miles straight up. Mm-hmm. So the ocean wasn't an immediate concern. The ground wasn't an immediate concern. As we merged the aircraft, we were higher airspeed than typical. And with a slight distraction from a new piece of equipment that I had, I didn't quite realize the airspeed that I had reached. And I opted to maneuver the aircraft nose low, so in a dive towards the ocean. And normally, I could complete that maneuver in less than 5,000 feet. So in my mind, I had plenty of airspace to work with. However, as I hit about bullseye nose low, so pointed straight at the ocean in that dive, the aircraft system detected bombs on the wings that weren't actually there. And so it limited the amount of G-force that I could apply to the jet. So effectively, that's like going around a sharp corner in a sports car and then having the steering wheel kick back halfway. Only instead of skidding off the road, I'm now stuck in a dive at the ocean. And all I could detect at the time was I had the stick all the way in my lap. I was commanding this 7.5 G pull on the aircraft, so you can feel that weight. Say my head and my helmet weigh approximately 20 pounds. Well, at nearly 8 Gs, that's like having an 150 to 160 pounds just on my head. Not to mention what my body felt like. I can feel all that G-force, and I'm straining to look and all that force on my head. And all of a sudden, that just lifted up, despite the fact that the stick was in my lap. In the few seconds I had to figure this out, I pulled the throttle to idle. I put out the speed brake in a desperate attempt to slow the aircraft, but it was too little too late. And with that control system overriding my input, the aircraft was just stuck on a collision course with the ocean. And 2 seconds before impact, I was in a 51 degrees nose low dive, so a steep dive, traveling at 695 miles per hour, which at that altitude is 0.95 indicated Mach, so 95% the speed of sound, effectively at the speed of sound or the sound barrier. A normal ejection is pretty violent. It can cause spinal compression, neck injury, flail injuries. I was way outside the envelope for what's supposed to be a survivable ejection, but I had no choice other than to pull the ejection handle, or I would have certainly gone into the ocean with the aircraft. I pulled that ejection handle, which unleashed a rocket motor underneath the seat, shooting me out of the jet, popping the canopy off. And as I impacted that near sonic airflow, it ripped my helmet off, gave me a traumatic brain injury, smashed my face up. I broke my neck, my left shoulder, bilateral humerus fractures in my upper arms. My right humerus tore through my right brachial artery, causing rapid internal bleeding. My left forearm shattered the radius and ulna and severed the median nerve, which controlled my left hand. Both my legs were flailing around so violently that the steel toe boots on my feet smashed open my tibia fibula in both lower legs, causing open leg fractures, nerve damage. I ejected so fast that the dry suit that I was wearing shred open. The gear on my vest ripped off the vest. Fortunately, I had just enough time. By the time I exited the aircraft, I was a second and a half from impacting the water. My parachute immediately deployed, and it slowed me enough that I didn't die on impact as I impacted that icy cold, churning ocean. As soon as I went in, the aircraft had already impacted the water, vaporized. The largest pieces they found of that $89 million Super Hornet were about the size of a manila envelope or a license
Wow.
plate. I immediately plunged into that cold water. And for anybody who likes to do cold plunges, they know what 37-degree Fahrenheit water feels like needles all over your skin. With broken extremities, I had no ability to swim. Fortunately, the life preserver unit around my neck inflated automatically and gave me enough buoyancy that as that parachute sunk underwater and started to drag me under, on occasion, I could get to the surface to get a breath of air. The parachute's supposed to automatically disconnect using a system called the Seawers, which are saltwater activated explosive devices that connect on the coke fittings that connect the parachute riser to the harness. Unfortunately, a lot of our gear is Vietnam era stuff, and one of those Seawers fired but didn't disconnect. The other one didn't even fire in the salt water. So I had that parachute that had just saved my life still connected, and it proceeded to drown me alive. And anybody who's been a surfer or ever been held under the water when you need a breath of air, you know that terrible feeling when you can't get a breath of air. And for the next hour and a half, I proceeded to just be drowned alive, inhaling a lot of salt water. I don't know how I didn't get eaten by Mary Lee, bleeding out in that icy cold ocean water with that great white shark right underneath me. Fortunately, my flight lead saw my position, dropped a mark, coordinated as the on-scene commander, and he got a nearby fishing vessel heading in my direction and coordinated to get some helicopters coming my way as well as the Coast Guard and a ship. It took about an hour and a half of chaos and all of this to finally get a helicopter on position that spotted me. There was a HAZREP for the rescue effort itself, which is a hazard report. There was a lot of miscommunication, different frequencies, near midair collisions, and chaos that goes along with something like this happens. But fortunately, a helicopter from HSC 28, a Navy Seahawk helicopter, got on station, and their pilot spotted my little dark head eventually bob up to the surface. My helmet had ripped off my head, so I didn't have any of that reflective material. My beacon had malfunctioned. So just by luck, their pilot just spotted my little dark head come up for a sip of air before I was drugged back under, and they got their rescue swimmer Cheech into the water with me. He was able to get in, hook into my carabiner, and he said he had been in the pool doing training where you get drug under and see the bottom of the pool in a lit pool. But to be drug under by the force of this parachute and go for the ride with me under that ocean, and then all he looked down and saw was this dark blue abyss and this tangled paracord and parachute, was a completely different ballgame for him. But he was able to rely on his training, cut the paracord loose, and get me back to the surface, and eventually got me back into the helicopter. And from there, we flew to Norfolk General, which is a level 1 trauma center in Norfolk, Virginia. The whole flight, they were fighting to keep me alive. I kept coding in and out of consciousness. They kept resuscitating me. Eventually, they got me back to the hospital. In the flight, one of the crew members had just started his lunch before they got the rescue call. And he had this meatball sub that was kind of half eaten that he had thrown back into the wrapper. And in the chaos of the rescue, that meatball sub had broken loose from the wrapper and it coated me in marinara sauce and meatball chunks. So as the hospital staff is unloading me onto a gurney, he had to explain, this crew member named Joey, he had to explain to him, hey, he's in bad shape, but that's just my lunch all over him. It's not his body gore. They rushed me
Man.
into care. My core body temperature was down to 87 degrees Fahrenheit. So I should have been dead from hypothermia. But the physicians eventually said, had I not had such severe hypothermia, I would have bled to death in my dry suit. So it was actually a good thing that my dry suit had shredded apart. Otherwise, I would have bled to death way before anybody got there from the extensive artery damage and open fractures in my legs. They treated me for severe hypothermia. I had multiple blood transfusions. Once I was semi-stable, they pumped the water out of my lungs. They rushed me into surgery and induced a coma. I then spent the next week in an induced coma, undergoing over a dozen trauma surgeries, limb salvage procedures with fasciotomies to save my limbs from amputation. Because the breaks were so bad and there was so much damage, my extremities had swollen up from inflammation. And in the past, not that long ago, they would have had to just amputate all my limbs. Thank you to a procedure called fasciotomy. They're able to open up the compartments of the muscle and relieve that pressure so that the blood can circulate. And that salvaged the limbs. They then reconstructed my skeleton with titanium rods, steel plates. So now my x-rays look like Wolverine, which is pretty sweet.
You got adamantium in you now?
No, just titanium, but it
Yeah.
seems to work. The military didn't want to splurge for the adamantium. But after a week of all these trauma surgeries, rebuilding my skeleton, they were trying to wake me up from the surgery, and I wasn't coming to. So I spent the next week in a non-induced coma where it left my family and squadron mates and friends all wondering, is he going to be a vegetable? Is he going to be brain dead? Is he even going to wake up at all? And kind of in the heat of all of that, my squadron mates were sitting around in the waiting area for the ICU. And the same pilot who kind of jinxed me on this flight, saying I hadn't done anything to earn a call sign yet, said, "Oh, he's a scrappy motherfucker. He'll be fine." And it kind of lifted the spirits of the room. And they took scrappy motherfucker and they shortened it into Smurf and said, that's my new call sign. And the politically correct version of it to get it passed by the board and all the leadership was, I was a short guy that turned blue from hypothermia. But now you know.
But that wasn't the real
story.
reason. Yeah. Man.
After another week, I eventually came to, just completely confused, no memory of what had happened. Between the head injury and all the medications that they had me on, I really didn't know what was going on. I remember I thought the blanket that was over me was made of lead or was tied down because I couldn't move, but it was because I was paralyzed. Eventually, the doctors and medical staff came in and they were just trying to lay it out for me, but they said, hey, you've been in a severe accident. You're in a high-speed ejection from a jet. Your body has been destroyed. You're never going to walk again. You're never going to use your arms again, and your flying career is over. And the first thing that came across my mind was how I was going to prove them all wrong. And little by little, each day, I just kind of kept doing what I could do. And that started by just trying to wiggle anything in my paralyzed body. After 3 months of basically every kind of therapy known to man, from vision therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, kinesiotherapy, physical therapy, recreational therapy, aqua therapy, you name it. I was eventually able to walk around on a walker again. I started to regain some function in my arms, and I was eventually discharged from the inpatient facility and returned to Virginia Beach, where I was stationed, to continue my treatment for the next 2 years. Over the next 2 years, I had more surgeries. I had to overcome prescription drug addiction to all of the pharmaceuticals they had me loaded up on. I mean, they had me on oxycodone, OxyContin. At one point, I was on fentanyl and Dilaudid, amitriptyline, tramadol, trazodone, and massive doses of medication called gabapentin. Uh, Eventually, I was able to wean myself off of all of that stuff through my hard work and the care that I received and all the surgeries. I was able to max out the Navy's physical fitness standards again. And after 2 years of all that, I returned to flying Super Hornets. And
Dude.
this is kind of like where the Disney happy ending version of my story would end. However, the journey got even more wild after that.
Well, can we pause before we get into the rest of the
Yeah,
journey?
of course. Sorry, I'm
Because
rambling here.
no. I mean, like, there's so many things like that are going through my mind because at multiple points I'm like, this has got to be the end of the story, and then you just kept going. Like it just gets. I mean, this is a movie. I actually had that question: did the cold water potentially help and save your life? And you answered that. But my biggest question, when well, first and foremost, a technical one. So when you're ejected, is the seat is ejected with you? Is that the technology that is still
Yes.
out there, right? So I'm trying to imagine, the original Top Gun, Goose hits that canopy, but he was ejected in his seat. So you were ejected at a high speed. You're attached to the seat, but the G-force is what tore your body apart.
It wasn't the G-force, although the G-force in an ejection is really strong. There's an instantaneous 12 to 14 vertical Gs that you experience, and that can really compress people's spine permanently. But what did so much damage to me was impacting the sound barrier with my body. I was traveling at 695 miles per hour. So if you've ever stuck your arm out a car window going, say, 70 miles per hour on the highway, you felt about 1/100th the force because that parasitic drag acting on my body becomes exponentially stronger with airspeed. So at almost 700 miles per hour, that's like 100 times the force that you'd feel if you stuck your body out the window on the highway.
Yeah.
And hitting that with my body, I mean, it was like being a rag doll.
Yeah.
It tore my body apart.
And so you're in the water for an hour and a half. And I don't even know if you remember this, but what's going on in your mind to keep you alive that long?
So from the point that I pulled the ejection handle, I don't have a linear memory. I've been able to recreate all of this through the extensive investigation that preceded the ejection. The aircraft data recorder, or the black box that came out, gave us all the parameters and details, talking to the rescue crew and other rescue vessels that were on scene. Uh, while in the water, I didn't have any linear memory of everything happening, although for years I got flashbacks in the form of night terrors where I would be back in the water. And when I was in the ocean, it was this overwhelming sense of dread of being drowned alive, of being pulled under with no ability to fight that, of being trapped. And my body just kicked into a full up survival mode. But as far as like a real clear picture of what
Yeah.
was going through my mind there, I just get these little snippets.
Yeah, foggy at best. I've had Kevin Hines on my show who survived jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, and he it was a seal that ended up propping him up, but he thought it was a shark that was going to eat him after surviving, and he was only in the water for a number of minutes before the Coast Guard swooped in to get him. You were in the water for an hour and a half. It's just unreal to think about in that regard. When you go into the military, and especially you go into such a role like you were in as a fighter pilot, there's risks. Or if you go into, you enlist in the Marines and you're going to go into the front lines, there's different risks in that regard. But could you have ever imagined this as a risk?
When you're in flight school, they tell you, look to your left, look to your right. Chances are one of the people amongst you is going to be in a serious mishap or killed in this line of work. And as a young 20-year-old dude, you're just kind of like, whatever, I'm going to be fine. It's always in the back of your mind, and it's hazardous. You deal with that every day, but it becomes kind of normalized because you're so used to working in such a hazardous environment. Did I ever think something this severe would happen to me? No. I don't think I mean, this is kind of the worst case scenario. other than being shot down over enemy lines and having to deal with being a
Torture and
prisoner of
yeah,
war or something.
yeah,
I don't think you could have a more terrifying experience, but um, in a way, I'm grateful for the experience, and in ways I was somehow prepared to handle it
yeah.
and made it through, and it's made me a stronger person.
Oh, 100%. I can't wait to get into the rest of your story. Before we do that, I was just, and also I want to talk about the PTSD and TBI because I'm a big advocate for brain health. Um, but I was just thinking, like, because I know a little bit about your world. One of my best friends is a crew chief at the Air National Guard here in Madison, Wisconsin. And he would tell me that almost, and by the way, I actually got to go on a boss flight and watch a mission laying next to the guy that's refueling you guys up in the air. So I got to actually watch not only a refueling, but I got to watch a mission where they were doing what you were doing in a fighter example. It was one of the coolest experiences of my life. And that was because of Chad. But what he was telling me is that almost everyone that goes into either the Air National Guard, the Air Force, or even in your case, the Navy, they want to be a pilot. And it's the most competitive field that he tells me of almost any of the services that we have. And so what was it about you, the competition that drove you, the skill set that you had that allowed you to succeed and become that naval aviator?
Yeah, it really takes a unique combination of characteristics and aptitude for things. On one hand, you have to have a certain type of personality that is okay with being in a very dangerous situation and being able to remain calm, which comes with training and experience. I think one thing that helped me was I had some flight experience before coming into the Navy. I was a flight instructor and a corporate pilot. Um, so as far as stick and rudder skills, I think I had an advantage at the very beginning of flight school. That also became kind of a disadvantage as I progressed, but I also had a really hard work ethic. Um, there's a lot of guys in that community that are, brilliant minds. They have photographic memories. They can read through something once and it sticks, and they're able to take something out of text and apply it in the aircraft immediately and learn very quickly. I was not as gifted as a lot of people in that community, but for whatever I lacked in that manner, I made up for in my work ethic, and I was willing to work hard as anybody, if not harder, to figure it out. And I think my skull was a little bit thicker than a lot of people in that community, but um, I think that also helped me overcome what I went through. So it was really a combination of personal characteristics, work ethic, and some natural ability for sure. That I think I had a leg up with some previous experience in my life. Um, I was an athlete growing up. I think that really helps. Having an athletic background, being able to deal with stress and discomfort, and that physicality. And it's sort of that unique combination of physicality and mental ability. There's super smart people that can come into the world of flight school and they struggle because they don't have the physicality to go with it. And in the Navy, at least, I kind of see there's sort of the three like sort of upper tier jobs, which are there's like the SEALs and the Special Forces community. There's the strike fighter community with fighter aviation in the Navy, and then there's also like the submariner, the nukes that ride around in these ballistic submarines. The nukes are very like incredibly intelligent, high level thinkers. The pilots and then the SEALs are like very physical and very like practical minded and intelligent, like street smarts. And I think the pilots are kind of a balance between those. We're kind of a balance between the super nerds and the super athletes, and you kind of have a blend of those two attributes.
No, that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. Let's move to, and maybe this is where the rest of your story will tie in, but I want the audience to get a little bit of this. So when discussing PTSD and TBI, and for those that don't know those acronyms, it's post-traumatic stress disorder. TBI is traumatic brain injury. Could you help the audience distinguish between the two and then shed light on your role TBI has played in your own life?
Yeah. So really, from what I've discovered, and I'll kind of go into my story here a little bit, if that's all right, to
Yeah,
continue
please
the
do.
journey. Those two things are very much related. The post-traumatic stress, as they're calling, I think they've dropped the D at this point, as it's not necessarily a disorder, it's a natural reaction to a certain
Yeah.
situation. And TBI, I think those two go hand in hand and are very interrelated. And there's actually been a lot of people that I have seen, very knowledgeable physicians like Dr. Mark Gordon, as well as Dr. Michael Lewis. They've really kind of been on the leading edge of TBI, PTSD treatment or PTS treatment. And they've found that there's absolutely an interlink between those two things. And it goes back to disruption in the physiology of the brain. And unfortunately, in mainstream medicine, they haven't quite caught up to what I think is really going on with PTS. PTS, I think, is a symptom of a dysfunctional brain, and it doesn't have to come from a severe trauma of ejecting into the sound barrier or being blown up by IEDs or RPGs or the severe head injury from, being playing football or being a boxer or UFC fighter, which those things can definitely cause dysfunction of the brain, but just chronic stress and the lifestyle that so many people live these days of just not getting sleep, not eating healthy, drinking regularly, drugs, like all these things, even just chronic stress over the course of our lifetime can cause dysfunction on a physiological level inside of our brain. And in my case, I had a severe TBI from the ejection. I had 2 years of pretty intense rehabilitation that really didn't give my brain a chance to fully recover. And then I went right back into this high stress world of fighter aviation where you're working hard, you're playing hard, you're burning the wick at both ends between studying your ass off, flying these incredibly stressful events. And then when you have free time, you're going out and you're playing hard with your buddies. Uh, you're drinking, you're not getting sleep. And as time went on, that took a toll on my brain. And I started to notice some dysfunction and some memory lapses, but I really just kind of brushed it off as just being tired. And I was on a flight on a detachment down at Tyndall Air Force Base, and we were doing a live fire missile exercise. I went out on a flight, I fired a live AIM-9 Mike heat-seeking missile at a drone. And then I broke off and I got to do some air combat maneuvering with an F-22 Raptor. And that was an incredible experience getting to fight this. For those that aren't familiar with the F-22 Raptor, it's one of the most advanced fighter aircraft that's ever been developed using conventional propulsion systems. And it can maneuver like something out of science fiction. But I got to fight this aircraft against another young dude, same age as me. Anyways, I came back from that flight. While I had vivid memory of fighting the Raptor, I had massive memory lapses and confusion surrounding the missile exercise, which was pretty concerning to not remember firing a live missile off my wing. Anyways, I just tried to tough it out. I went back to my hotel room we were staying at that night. I couldn't sleep really. The next day I was just on duty. I didn't quite feel like myself all day, and I continued to get worse. And by that second night, by the time I got back to my hotel, I was experiencing panic attacks, which I had never had in my life. When I sat down on my bed, it felt like the entire room was tumbling around me. So I was experiencing vertigo, which I had never had. I was trying to set the alarm on my phone, and I couldn't do the simple math or operate my alarm to get up for the next morning. I kind of laid down to try to just tough it out again, and it wasn't getting any better. So I ended up calling the squadron safety officer. It was suspected that I had type 2 decompression sickness, which in the Super Hornet and especially the Legacy Hornets of the F-18 models, there had been a number of issues with the pressurization systems causing rapid decompression and rapid cabin pressure fluctuations that were causing people to experience decompression sickness. For anybody that's a scuba diver, they're probably familiar with that. if you come up from depth too quickly, it can cause an expansion of the gases that are in our blood. That nitrogen can come out of
Hmm.
solution and form little bubbles. And when you get it in your joints, it's very uncomfortable. It's called the bends. But if you get that in your brain, it can be like an aneurysm. It can even kill you. And that's called type 2 decompression sickness. So there's a very good chance that I had type 2 decompression sickness on top of a unresolved brain injury that I already had, and it was causing massive dysfunction. They ended up putting me in a hyperbaric chamber at a nearby dive base in Mayport and treating me for decompression sickness. It helped a little bit, uh, but the next day when I went back in to see the doc, he said, when you get back from this detachment, you need to go in and see the flight surgeon, which after going through everything I had done to get back to flying, all the medical waivers I had to get, the last thing I wanted to do was go into medical, because
Yeah.
everybody in these high performance roles in the military knows going into medical with a problem can very quickly spell the end of your career. But in consideration of it over several days, I knew that I didn't want to cause another mishap. I didn't want to hurt somebody else or kill myself or cause another crash of an aircraft. So I reluctantly went into medical, and before long, they recognized this dysfunction, and I very quickly had a delayed PTSD diagnosis, and they proceeded to treat that with a lot of conventional therapies, from cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, cognitive processing therapy, and a lot of these things I think they can be helpful in some cases. They have less than a 30% effective rate. And meanwhile, this disrupted physiology in my brain was going completely ignored. Unfortunately, most of the ways of dealing with mental illness in general are take a psych med that suppresses the symptoms.
Yes.
But it actually, meanwhile, that underlying physiology that's in chaos is just getting worse and worse. And that's exactly what happened to me. Eventually, I was put on a medication called Seroquel or quetiapine, which is used, in my case, in low doses for insomnia. I was having terrible insomnia persistently. And while it knocked me out in this sort of drug induced form of unconsciousness, it wasn't restful sleep that I was getting. And so over time, that was just exacerbating that underlying dysfunction in my brain. Meanwhile, the psychiatrist and psychology department didn't really fully grasp this, and that TBI was not being treated. Um, as time went on, the same thing that happened with the pain meds happened with the psych meds, where I built a tolerance. So I needed more of the medication. And with that came more dysfunction, more catastrophe to my brain, and more side effect. And I went from being paranoid and hypervigilant with insomnia to full blown psychoses. I thought I was in the Truman Show at one point. Like, I thought everything around me was an act. I thought everybody I interacted with was scripted. And then it got to the point where I was just completely losing touch with reality. For anybody who's seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, where this mathematician kind of just goes into a full-blown psychosis where he thinks he's involved in this elaborate, with the CIA and
Yeah.
spies
Yeah.
and being hunted. It was similar for me. I thought I was being hunted by the government. I became afraid to go near the windows in our house. I effectively locked myself in my home. Um, I stopped eating. I stopped drinking because I thought it was poison, where I was in fact being poisoned by the United States government. It just happened to be in the FDA approved medications that I was being prescribed,
Yeah.
not some clandestine operation to poison me through my food and water. My wife had just had our first little boy. He was only a few months old, and now she was having to deal with me, a full grown adult in full blown psychoses. And the burden on her was tremendous. I went into a very bad depression. I thought I was, which is very common with brain injury, with that dysfunction, causes hormonal imbalances, causes low testosterone, causes you to just feel like garbage. And that was absolutely progressing as this went on, as I was really, the underlying problem was not being treated. And it got to the point where I was suicidal. I kept a pistol in my little end table by the bed. And one night I reached into it and I was wondering the gun oil going to taste like on my tongue? What's the barrel going to feel like on my teeth?
Mm.
And I looked over and my wife and my little boy were sleeping peacefully next to me. And the only thing that kept me from putting that pistol in my mouth was I didn't want to wake them up. I put the
Mm.
gun away. I went back into that deep depression. I felt like I was letting all of my squadron mates down. Feel like I let everybody down that had put their faith in me to get back to flying, that I was a failure. And the mind just kind of spiraled out of control. And
Yeah.
the treatment continued, just more Seroquel, more Seroquel. I eventually went through a medical board, which is the bureaucratic equivalent of the Indiana Jones Temple of Doom. The whole process is sort of riddled with the administrative booby traps to derail you. And understandably, there's a lot of people that fake injury to get out of the military, trying to get medical benefits and financial benefits. But unfortunately, even with the support of my command, extensive medical records, and all these symptoms that were very obvious, it was still a difficult battle to get through that required appeals and this whole long drawn out process that luckily my wife helped me battle through, because I was completely mentally out of it. I was eventually medically retired. There's been guys going through that medical board process that are full-blown decorated heroes with multiple combat deployments, Bronze Stars, Silver Stars, amputees that go through that same process, and they get kicked out of the military without any benefit, that are now living under a bridge, homeless. And unfortunately, that happens time and time again.
And that's absolutely unacceptable. And it's something we got to fix in this country.
Absolutely.
I just want to chime in here. You have, so I want to back up what you said on the TBI and PTS, because, and first of all, I'm so glad that God and you had a recognition not to pull that trigger, because part of my story is my father-in-law did pull that trigger. And where I want to go with this TBI PTS is my mother-in-law found him. And luckily, she doesn't remember it, because it basically was a TBI without impact. Like you mentioned, it doesn't have to be a football injury, what you went through, MMA, whatever. It doesn't have to be a blow to the head. The PTS was caused by a TBI from witnessing the love of her life dead from a bullet wound. And so it doesn't have to, that was the trauma that her brain received, and is now working through that in many ways to make sure that she can live a healthy life the rest of her life, living through that TBI and PTS. So I just want to back up what you said there. And I want to get into what you're doing now in healing, because it's so important. Like those pharmaceuticals, first and foremost, I had another guest on the show that was an undercover police officer that got ran over and was so badly injured that he got addicted to fentanyl, and that ruined his family. And now he is healed, and he's trying to heal and solve the fentanyl crisis down in Arizona. So I'm so glad you were able to get yourself off those very addictive medications. And I want to get into what you're doing there. This other piece of it that was going through my mind, we just released this week that we're recording this, John McCaskill, who is a former Navy SEAL commander. You know John? And
yeah.
he and I got into talking about how, as you were talking about your, not getting restful sleep, it's like the human body can go 3 days without water. It can go quite a bit of time without food, but without sleep, we go into a psychosis. And usually that's about 8 days. And John actually mentioned, he goes, Josh, I don't know if you knew this, but the people that have tried to set the world record for without sleep have gone into a psychosis. Like that's how important rest is to not only recovery, but healing. And so for you taking a pharmaceutical that's not allowing you to rest and heal, that can drive that psychosis, and no wonder that's where that took you. So your approach to healing involves steering clear of pharmaceuticals now in the journey to really alleviate your brain pain. And many perceive this as a challenging path, or even like the road less taken. But what's motivated you to choose this route, and how are you helping others now with learning about this route?
Yeah, so the way I kind of discovered this was I went on for years with these conventional approaches to dealing with PTSD, and that was these pharmaceuticals. And even after being medically retired, I went to the VA and it was the same approach. Hey, you just have to take this pill the rest of your life. And as time went on, those pills got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I had to take more and higher dosage. And within 3 days of having my dosage of Seroquel increased from 300 milligrams a night up to 450 milligrams a night, which is a heroic dose of that stuff. My wife came home from a job interview to find me rustling around. I was completely naked. I had shaved off all my hair for some reason. I had shaved off my eyebrows even. I was the only thing I was wearing was a black plastic garbage bag tied around my neck like a cape because I thought I was going to go out into the northern Michigan winter weather and fight crime like a superhero. Um, she drove me to the nearest emergency room about an hour away. After a couple nights in severe psychoses, having an out-of-body experience, I was taken down to a VA inpatient psych facility in Battle Creek, Michigan, where I was administered into a psych facility. And unfortunately, the treatment that I saw and received there was all the very same things that I saw in survival training in the military. Uh, Many people get to have this experience where you get to see what it would be like to be a prisoner of war. And there's things like captivity and sleep deprivation and deprived of nutrients and confined and treated less than human. Well, when you go into an inpatient psych facility in the United States, and in this one I was in particular, all the exact same things are happening. I was on one-to-one care due to the severity of my psychoses. And in that, they have to check on you every 15 minutes. And to do so, they shine a flashlight in your face. So even if I was starting to fall asleep, it would wake me back up. So you're sleep deprived for days and weeks. The food that they're feeding people is completely nutrient devoid prison food. You're dressed like a prisoner in prison scrubs. You're oftentimes treated by less than human by many of the staff who just assume because you're in and out of psychosis that you're no longer a human underneath that. And you're confined into this tiny facility. We were lucky to get to go outside once a week into a concrete yard that was surrounded by buildings and fences with no connection to nature. And that's the way they're treating American veterans and the population at large. If you have to have any sort of inpatient psych treatments, it's completely broken. And it seemed the only remedy that they provided was there was a whole lot of psych meds that they're happy to put you on, in fact, are required to be put on. I was voluntarily admitted into the center. I hadn't committed any crimes. I hadn't been violent. I was just an American veteran trying to get help. And the only thing that happened there was they were forcing meds on me without discussing what they were. And when I refused to take them, I became a problem for them. And when I saw what they were doing to people in there, including myself, I planned an escape. I started to use training that I had from my survival training in the military to make weapons, to coordinate with other people in there. And there were other veterans in this facility that had been in and out of prison in their time dealing with mental illness and drug addiction and living on the streets. And they all agreed they'd rather be in a federal prison than in this VA inpatient psych facility because the food's better in prison. You get to go outside every day in prison. There's more a sense of community in prison. There's more space in prison. So you're literally treated better in prison than as an American veteran having a mental health crisis.
This should piss everyone off.
I tried
literally, if you want to be pissed off about anything, like that should absolutely piss every American off.
And it's the mental health system in general in our country is like this, and it's worse in some places than others. But what I saw going on at this facility, and still has happening today, made me this massive sense of betrayal. Like I had served my country honorably. I had done all this to be back and serve it and gone through so much. And all the guys in there had done way more than I had ever done. And they were being treated like that. And it pissed me off. Anyways, I planned an escape. I pulled the fire alarm one night and hoped that they would, make us all go outside for the fire. And those of us with the wherewithal that weren't just complete zombies from the medications yet, which many people were, could make a run for it. Unfortunately, I think somebody had already tried this trick in the past. They put us back on lockdown, And then I was forcefully injected with a medication called Haldol. As soon as that medication entered my bloodstream, it felt like there were insects trying to crawl their way out from underneath my skin. All I wanted to do was run and scream and tear my own skin off. Eventually, I collapsed. And when I came to, I don't know if it was the next day or a few days later, I was brought into a room, literally drooling on myself. And there was a woman there that was supposed to be my legal counsel. She took my hand and placed a pen in it and put my hand on these papers and had me scribble, even though I had no idea what I was doing. What I was doing was I was committing myself to that facility so I could no longer voluntarily leave. It also stripped me of my Second Amendment right to bear arms and put me on the law enforcement information network as if I had committed a felony. So as an American veteran just trying to receive help, I was stripped of my constitutional rights. I was tortured. I was effectively imprisoned against my will and forced drugged. Eventually, luckily, my family got me out of that facility, which was lucky. They didn't want to let me go. And there were so many other guys in there that didn't have that support to get them out. Luckily, my wife is a trauma nurse, so she had dealt with psychoses and patients in the emergency room before. My mother is a retired physician. My dad worked in healthcare. Only because I had such a strong family unit that was willing to take me in my condition, they got me out of there. But had I not, I was just continuing to get worse and worse in that facility with more and more drugs. Eventually, I got out and it continued with more drugs for years, and it destroyed me. The resentment I had towards the government for what I had seen, I was a depressed, miserable human being. I could barely do the dishes anymore. The drugs that they had me on were so debilitating. My little boy would come up to me and ask me to play, and I would just push him away and tell him to leave me alone. I was on the verge of divorce. The only reason my wife didn't divorce me is because she was worried that had there been a custody battle and I won any custody of our kids, that I would have been a danger to them in my state that I was at that point. Luckily, I came across the book called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. And through a combination of audiobook and reading, my memory was so bad at that point, I couldn't retain like a full paragraph at a time, but little by little, I gained enough out of that book that there was an alternative way of dealing with severe mental health injuries using psychedelic assisted therapy or indigenous medicines. I reached out to some organizations, including Vet Solutions, that provide psychedelic assisted therapy out of the country since it's still illegal in the United States.
Yeah.
To
Although
actually
they're
get real
experimenting
help.
in some states, but yeah,
There's-
it's very frowned upon still.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is some trials going on, and I think it's progressing. It's too effective to ignore, but the pharmaceutical industry is fighting it and trying to create synthetic variants of all these things so that they can profit off of these treatments.
Yep.
But at least it's moving in the right direction in our country. But still, to this day, if you are an American veteran, you have to travel outside of the land of the free to receive effective mental health treatments for the injuries you received while in the service. Luckily, there's Veteran Solutions, Heroic Hearts Project, Warrior Angel Foundation. There's a number of these that are getting people help. No Fallen Heroes is another one. But over the course of a few years, I received care outside of the United States, as well as TBI treatment through an organization called Defenders of Freedom at a TBI clinic. And I discovered this whole world of sort of the secret back door of dealing with mental health issues, which is treating the TBI and treating sort of the soul rather than just masking symptoms with drugs. But through these alternative modalities with TBI treatment, I had extensive lab work done to actually get a real snapshot of what was going on with my physiology, to addressing hormonal imbalances, to addressing other issues that have been caused by being on psych meds for years. And once they actually started to treat the physiology in combination with the sort of spiritual awakening and the soul healing that I think I really got from the psychedelic therapy, as well as a lot of these psychedelic medications or indigenous medicines are incredibly powerful in healing the physiology of the brain. They do a lot to cause neuroregeneration that helps your brain heal from severe
Mm,
injury and trauma. So they're effective on many levels. But going from somebody who was suicidal, loaded full of psych meds, unable to do the dishes, a bitter human being to be around my family, on the verge of divorce with my life collapsing around me like it happens for so many other people in that situation, it was sort of this, I pulled this thing out at the last second to save myself and my family. And through largely holistic means, through living a healthy lifestyle, while I've been overcoming these things, I've completely stopped drinking alcohol, using tobacco, caffeine, any sort of substance other than just healthy whole foods, wild game, organic produce, locally grown produce, things that I grow in my own yard, and just living a very different lifestyle to give my body a chance to heal. I've seen massive changes in myself, and I've met enough people with their own severe traumas and injuries going through the same process to know that just taking a pill is not going to cure you.
yeah.
It may be needed in the short term to deal with a severe psychosis and maybe get you going in the right direction, but this long-term treatment with psych meds and a lot of the other conventional means of dealing with psych issues it's a broken system, and it's profit based. It's a successful business model. It's highly profitable, which is why it's continuing to grow in the way it is. But real healing comes from outside of that model.
Yep.
Um,
So go into that just a little bit. What, uh, um, natural medicines did you get, hallucinogenics, whatever they were? What worked for you, in case someone is listening that's struggling and wants to seek out those alternatives?
so I was even in the middle of northern Michigan, in the middle of nowhere. I was able to find someone that provided ceremony work with psilocybin mushrooms. Um, there is an underground network of these things that is actually exploding that you may be
Yep.
able to find locally. It is still illegal. It is still treated as, you know, like you're, you know,
Criminal.
yeah, criminal. And there's still this sort of stigma to it that a lot of people have that, oh, you're just a bunch of drug loving hippies. Well, to compare these medicines when done properly with ceremony and integration, uh, or in a clinical setting, comparing those to something like, doing meth or heroin or crack or whatever, it's not a drug in the same category whatsoever. These are healing
Not at all.
modalities that are incredibly potent. If done properly, they have a massive transformation on the people. Taking the ceremony piece of it and taking the medicine is just the first step. You have to integrate what you learn from that, and you have to learn and have the changes. Um, but for me, it started with that psilocybin ceremony. I then met Jesse Gould, who runs Heroic Heart Project. They were able to get me down to Peru, where I did 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, which is a very heavy duty indigenous medicine from South America.
Yeah, I was going to ask
Uh,
about that because I've had some friends that have had great experiences and has completely changed their life with that regard.
yeah, it was, I mean, it caused my heart to just explode open, and it reconnected me to a spiritual side and divinity in a way that I had never had a relationship nearly as strong in my life. I was fortunate to be part of a, a peyote ceremony with a Native American group through the organization called Defenders of Freedom, where I got to go to a TBI treatment facility, and they did all these different alternative modalities. A lot of it was just eye movement exercises. They did a very extensive lab work, and they were able to see the dysfunction in my physiology and address that through supplements and nutraceuticals. I worked with Dr. Michael Lewis, who provided high doses of fish oil, which is actually something I think anybody can do, is gradually work your way up onto a high dose of high quality fish oil. Nordic Naturals is a really good company that actually runs their fish oil through a distillation process to remove any heavy metals. If you just get the cheapo fish oils, they're going to have a lot of heavy metals that can actually cause more harm than good. But if you can work your way gradually up to about 3,000 milligrams a day of a good quality fish oil, that fish oil provides the building blocks for your brain, and it helps it rapidly repair from injury. There's also a Dr. Mark Gordon. There's a couple episodes of him on the Rogan podcast that he talks with Adam Marr, who's a former Green Beret that went through a lot of the struggles that I have, as well as a lot of other veterans do, which is physical injuries, brain injury, thrown all together with a bunch of psych meds that throw your life out of whack. He's been able to heal that underlying physiology, and Dr. Mark Gordon provides assistance in dealing with that more holistically. He has a number of products, supplements that you can purchase off his website that help to heal the brain, similar to fish oil, and really just getting on a healthy diet and
your exercise,
getting
right?
active. Yeah. And not overdoing the exercise, but incorporating a regular exercise into your life. And if you're just coming off from not doing anything, maybe that just means 15 minutes of walking a day. Just get outside and take a walk. You have to be careful with brain injury and exercise, in that you can overdo it and it can actually cause more brain injury and more stress, and cause the release of cortisol if you just go jump into freaking CrossFit workouts right away and just start crushing your body. But if you start gradually incorporating some sort of exercise, 15, 20 minutes a day, be it walking, jogging, elliptical, maybe some yoga and stretching, just something to get active, that does a lot. Breath work I found incredibly helpful. And I now use a meditation practice, or prayer is incredibly powerful. And I think these indigenous medicines have a way of opening a person up so that they're more receptive to getting to a meditative state or getting deeper in prayer, where they're really connecting with something beyond themselves. That's incredibly healing. It's the most healing thing there is opening your heart to that and being in touch with that love that is all around us. That is, whatever you want to call it, divinity, God, the oneness, the quantum
universe,
field.
whatever.
When you can get back in touch with that and realize that it's all around you, it's infinite in healing your body and your soul.
So what Kegan's talking about here is what God gave us, right? Not pharmaceuticals that we can purchase, but what God gave us.
Yes.
And if you listen to Dave Asprey at all, he talks about the levels that you can go through, including breath work being the level one. Is there's a way, and I haven't figured this out yet and done the research yet, but he was talking about breath work. There's a certain breath work you can do where you can have certain effects that are similar to a psilocybin or similar to a naturopath type medicine. And I was fascinated by that. I don't know if it's just opening up your mind's eye to it or whatever it may be, but I got to do some more research in that, because I love breath work. And if I can get spiritually better and heal as a human at the same time, that makes it all the more worth it. So you have to ask yourself, we have to ask ourselves why these things are bastardized. And, it all leads back to big pharma. And like Kegan said, they're trying to get their hands in everything now and make a synthetic, which will never be as good, just like eating produce or meats that are juiced up with hormones versus going the natural path, growing your own produce, raising your own cattle, whatever it may be. That's where the health benefits come from. And so we have to ask ourselves why the FDA, why our government is pushing some of this other stuff, whereas there's 30 industrialized countries that will have foods that we allow here in America that are banned. Thousands of foods that are banned. Like if you get Lay's potato chips in Europe, totally different ingredients than the Lay's potato chips here. Lay's is an American company, and yet they pump their hormones and fake shit into the chips that they sell to us and make a more natural, healthy one for Europe. Okay, why are we allowing that? Is the FDA even relevant? Should we trust anything the FDA does? And then when we don't trust something that the federal government's putting down our throat, that opens up another whole slew of questions. But real quick, we're over time, and so I thank you for extra time today. But this is such an important conversation, and your story is incredible. How does the Spartan Leadership community because my blood was boiling as you were describing your experience in the psych ward in the VA. And I can imagine there's others that are feeling some type of way after hearing your story. What actionable steps can we take to support your noble mission of saving the lives of our struggling veterans?
I will provide you a list of the nonprofit organizations that have helped me and are helping a lot of other veterans. So you can put them in the show notes so that people can
please,
access
thank
that.
you.
But there's a wide number of veteran service organizations that are kind of filling the gaps. And it's largely being led by members of the Special Forces community who have been through these same struggles, former fighter pilots who've been through these same struggles. But we are on a mission because we've seen how broken the system is, and we're using our training from the military, we're using our ability to be cunning to find new routes despite all the regulation and the fact that, unfortunately, we live in a country that is driven by industry, and it's gotten to a point that is harmful to the American people. And I don't think that these organizations, I don't think the pharmaceutical industry is necessarily evil, but they are profit driven. In fact, they are legally obligated to be profit driven. And so there's no doubt that all of these industries, the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, you name it, are working together to better their business position. That's just what people in positions of power and wealth do, is they're going to better their financial position. And unfortunately, that's the driving force in our country that we have to overcome, that is making many of the ways that you can heal yourself illegal or difficult or impossible to come by. But just so you know, if you're willing to take the effort to do the research, you can heal yourself from whatever you're dealing with, whatever extreme it is. You don't have to be stuck on pharmaceutical meds the rest of your life, even though the people in the white lab coats with 10 years of training and fancy degrees will tell you that's what you have to do. That's not the case. I'm starting a website right now. It's heartrise.com. So that's hearttachrise.com. It should be up in the near future, where I also have links to resources and veteran service organizations that can help people, as well as providing people guidance in their own healing journey. But I'll provide you a whole list of that in the show notes so that people can just click and go to these places. Whether you want to support, if you're financially capable of supporting other people getting these treatments, they're reliant on donations. Or if you're a service member, a first responder, or even just somebody who's curious on doing this outside of the military, there are ways that you can heal and move forward. So know that there's hope, and I'll make sure to get you all those resources. Some great ones just off the top of my head. Veterans Solutions, run by Marcus and Amber Capone, Heroic Hearts Project, Defenders of Freedom, No Fallen Heroes. The list goes on. So I will get you that for sure.
Yeah, and we'll put those out there, everybody. Hey, could I ask you one fun question before we go?
Of course.
Maverick was one of my favorite movies that have come out in recent years. And as a former fighter pilot yourself, what is the thing that you think they got right in that movie and thing that's like total bullshit?
So I was pleasantly surprised by that movie. Luckily, the people who had written the script for that movie, they actually went to Top Gun in Fallon and they consulted real no shit fighter pilots on it. The original script that they had, some of the pilots told them this is garbage. And the one guy that was in charge of it at the time got fired because he basically told Tom Cruise, like, hey, this is shit. Well, luckily they ended up taking the guy's advice and listening to the advice of the fighter community. And the final product of that movie I thought was great. Like, it was, yeah, the tactical stuff is pretty fictional, but one, it has to be that way because we can't tell them any of the stuff that we really do for secrecy. And two, they had to make it visually interesting in a way that can be portrayed on the screen. But as far as like the fighter spirit and the camaraderie and like some of the humor in military aviation, they really nailed that, despite some of the tactical stretches and inaccuracies. Overall, I thought it was a great movie.
Yeah, for me, it was just like, first of all, the first one was such a classic, and it's hard to repeat that, especially after 30 years of it not being followed up on. But it's like I sat there and debate, like, is it better than the first one? I think the storyline is. And for me, anyhow, I think they just did a great job. They kept all the woke shit out of it. They kept the competitive drive in it. It was just a fun, great movie to me. So anyhow, I was walking over to the podcast studio today. I was like, I got to ask him one question on this. All right, last question, then we'll let you go. What is an unpopular belief that you hold to be true that most others would not agree with?
I guess my unpopular belief is that one of the most powerful tools for healing is indigenous medicine, and it's got stigma. It's illegal. There's so much controversy around it, but I've now been working, helping facilitate with Iboga, which is also an incredibly powerful psychedelic. And I've seen people overcome some of the most horrific trauma that makes mine sound like a walk in the park. So no doubt I believe that. And I also believe that the power to heal yourself is within all of us. And if you can access and open your heart again and get back in touch with the love that is all around us, you can heal just through that.
That's good. And I agree with you because I've seen it have some amazing effects in people around me, and getting to see you today, what you've overcome. Kegan, I can't thank you enough for your service to our country, the man you are today. So glad that you're here to tell your story and help our veterans and help us as Americans. I'm ashamed of our government and what you had to go through and endure. I think it's utter bullshit. But I'm glad that you're here today to help in that fight. So thank you again, brother.
Thank you for having a podcast. I think this is one of the most powerful tools we still have, despite a government that is teetering on the edge of tyranny. Is this freedom of speech that we still enjoy in our country, and podcasts are disseminating this information in a way that I don't think can be stopped, until the government controls the internet too, which they're working on. But right now they're playing a lot of whack-a-mole trying to silence the truth. And the matter of fact is, this is the truth, and the truth is going to persevere no matter what they do. And
as long as I have a free voice, and as long as you have a free voice, we're going to use it, right?
Absolutely.
All right, Spartans, I know I don't have to ask today. I know that you got a lot out of this. Kegan's story is absolutely incredible. It's incredible. Share the crap out of this episode. Remember, the good and great are the enemies of possible. Lead like a Spartan today.